super sloppy game from the Buffalo Bills in preseason week 2. We're going to break that down on today's episode of the Wandering Buffalo podcast.
You are now listening to the Wandering Buffalo podcast with your hosts, Justin Goddard and Andrew Chang.
Welcome to everybody, and thank you for joining me on another episode of the Wandering Buffalo podcast, a show here on the Buffalo Fanbase Network. I'm your host, 2 Changs, and my co-host, JGods22, will be doing the second half of this episode. Very, very sloppy. Oh my god. That's just the only words that can come to my mind is just like, what did I just watch? And I always have to take a step back when viewing or doing an episode like this, because I want to just write and talk about all like the bad things, like nitpick really hard. But then I always have to remind myself at the end of the day, like, one, it's just a game, so there's nothing really to be too upset about, and two, it's a preseason game at that. So I understand how some of us Bills fans are feeling. I stayed off social media because I knew what I was gonna see. And then I checked it this morning. I was like, wow, I'm glad I stayed off it. That would have fueled even more fire for this episode. But it wasn't all bad, and I'm here to break it down. So the way that this episode is going to work is that I'm going to talk about the offensive side of the football, and then on the second half of this episode, Justin's going to come in and do that defensive side of the football. He touched about special teams as well, and we're both going to be talking about penalties, since that just seemed to be a great highlight or low light of the Buffalo Bills yesterday. Anyways, let's get into it, and I'm actually going to start with the offensive line. I guess we'll talk about the good and the bad. Let's start with the bad, and I don't really think there's any way of getting around it, unless you're, a defensive end of the Pittsburgh Steelers yesterday, is that the offensive tackle depth and just position itself isn't looking great. Now, I do want to mention that Tommy Doyle did get hurt, and I guess he got air cast. He's off. He got carted off, which isn't good for the depth, right? Because that just left us immediately to insert David Quessenberry, and then Ryan Van DeMark, and then after that, the third team kind of comes in. But what I noticed when watching Quessenberry is that he's exactly what we thought he was. He's struggling. And I understand that, it's a second year into the system, but he's getting beat pretty bad. I feel like he wasn't this bad last year all the time, but I feel like he's just getting worse and worse. And I don't know if I feel comfortable with that, with him being the right tackle. And, he is kind of that swing person, so we could switch over to the left tackle. But let's talk about other offensive tackles like Spencer Brown, because that's where I really want to focus on this. Spencer Brown, third season, he's got to realize the ceiling. We've already given him all the explanations for why his play has been so up and down. The back surgery, not playing real 11-on-11 football like through high school, and then having his last year in college get shut down due to COVID. Well, that's great and all, but it's his third year as an NFL starter. That's usually when, at least to Sean McDermott, when players reach their ceiling or they know who they are. And what I saw from Spencer Brown is that he struggled. It wasn't all bad, but it was up and down. And I understand Pittsburgh's got a really good defensive line, but guys, you gotta win some of them, and he did. But I didn't come away feeling like, you know what, Spencer Brown, I feel solely confident that you have this job and you're gonna do it really well. I kind of walked away like, you could have been better. I think about that holding play. He got beat. And we'll go into Josh Allen after the offensive tackle or offensive line depth and the other quarterbacks. But just in general, I just felt like he struggled so much. And now the depth at offensive tackle, who are you going to put in there? Ryan Van DeMark? It was always like Tommy Doyle, Ryan Van DeMark, and David Quessenberry, and like two of those people would kind of get that position. Well, now Tommy Doyle is not looking like he's going to be able to even go for, at least he's going on IR, maybe not season-ending IR, or maybe he's on the PUP list. I don't really know the roster gymnastics that needs to be done here, but maybe we need to kick the tires on some veterans out there. Maybe we get on the phone with Arizona, trade for like Beachum. I know that's a big thing on social media right now, but just in general, like, yikes, we got to do something because we got to stand Josh Allen up. We can't have him running around like crazy like we saw him do towards the end of last year, because that obviously didn't work out for us, especially late in the season. Well, let's talk about some good stuff with the offensive line, and I really thought the interior offensive line, for the most part, did pretty good. I feel pretty confident that Osiris Torrance is going to win that right guard position. And even though that, Connor McGovern had a penalty on him, I thought he did okay. I saw him get out there in the second level with runs and just kind of like plow piles forward. He looked okay, and then Mitch Morris, and then looked, like Mitch Morris, perfectly fine. Ryan Bates, love him as a backup center and someone who can fill in at all 5 spots. Mainly, I think he's better suited in filling in the interior line, and he can kick outside. But if he does, just primarily be a backup to any of those 3 spots, that's really good to me. Okay, let's talk about the quarterbacks here, and we'll start with Josh Allen. I think he had 3 drives, 3 and out. Then that second drive was a bunch of penalties, and then the third drive just didn't end up well, like having to punt the ball away. I believe, again, to penalties. And I think Josh did some really nice things. You saw, like, the it factor, the intangibles, the throwing down the field, Diggs, Kincaid, and all that stuff. They were all getting involved, and Kincaid, man, I'm really feeling good about him. We'll talk about him here in just a minute. But Josh, I felt like at moments he was really good. He that sideline deep throw, even though it got erased by a Spencer Brown holding penalty, really kind of showed you like, wow, that was a really accurate throw. Sideline, toe tap, only where Gabe Davis could do it. You saw a little bit of him maneuvering the pocket, climbing it just to get the receivers the balls in positions where they could only get it because the offensive line was kind of struggling at points. But in general, Josh looked like Josh, and I bet you we would have scored or got some type of points out of Josh's second drive at least, but it just got completely, what did we get, like 4 or 5 penalties in a row or something like that? 5 might have been an exaggeration, but it was like holding, false start, holding. It was just terrible. Really just exploded any real momentum that Josh Allen and the first team offense could really do in that situation. So it's not all on Josh for that, but it just showed me, again, it was sloppy play from everyone. Now I look at the other quarterbacks, and Matt Barkley came out guns blazing. I'm just like, oh man, Matt Barkley looks good. Like, really good. Like, he's looking like he's playing better than Josh, kind of good. I'm like, well, it's Matt Barkley, right? Like, let's tone it down. And he keeps marching down the field. It looks like we're going to score and then kind of get ourselves back in this game. No, we don't. It's an interception. And then Matt Barkley throws another interception. Then he turns over the ball 2 more times outside of that. And it kind of was like this, rude awakening for us Bills fans, because we saw how he played last game, and we were like, wow, that was really good. Matt Barkley, and the team even felt like he did good. He got the second start outside of Josh Allen, and then he didn't do so hot, and I think Kyle Allen came in and did better than him, honestly. So now you're back at square one, or step one, and you don't really know who's better at this point. Is it Kyle Allen? Is it Matt Barkley? Bill's got to figure it out. They really do. not really sure what they're going to do there. But let's move on to the wide receivers. And I thought they did fine. Like I mentioned, Gabe Davis did Gabe Davis things, so sideline surgeon. Stephon Diggs, I thought he had a pretty solid game. I didn't like how he didn't catch that pass against, what was it, Alex Highsmith? The defensive end was on Diggs. And I don't think it was on him. Maybe it was the ball by Josh, but we're talking about defensive end guarding a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL. What's going on here? Got to catch that type thing. In any event, or in any rate, I thought all the starting wide receivers did good, but I really just want to touch upon the fact that I think there's so much momentum going for Andy Isabella, and I'm not trying to fall into that preseason darling kind of conversation, but I really, really think that Andy Isabella might make this team, and I'm looking through the wide receivers, and unanimously out there, people are saying it's probably going to be 5, 6 receivers most likely. Doubtful will be 7. Well, you're going down that list, and really you're just like, okay, well then it's probably going to be shorter a 5th-round draft pick from this most recent draft, or Andy Isabella. What do you do there? Justin Shorter had a pretty good game. I'd say he led the team in receiving, got a touchdown. Andy Isabella, though, he also did pretty good. The team's talking about him. They gave him a press conference. He got the first return duties on kickoff. What do the Bills do here, right? I think that 3rd preseason game, we really got to pay attention to Andy Isabella and Justin Shorter, because I think whoever performs the best, or we got to read between the lines during these press conferences to figure out how the team is talking about either or of these wide receivers, to figure out if it is truly a Shorter versus Isabella conversation, and if it is, which one of them do they go with? Andy Isabella, really good in open space. He's got that crazy speed, unmatchable. That you just can't teach speed. And then you look at Justin Shorter, who's more of big boy, I'm going to win down the field by outboxing you. It's just, it's like trying to compare a sports car to a monster truck. It's which one of those do you want? It's man, I don't know what works best for this offense. And I guess we're going to find out what the team thinks is best in a couple of weeks here. Let's talk about the running backs. I thought that Cook looked meh at best. I didn't feel like he performed as good as he did in the first preseason game. I thought there was an opportunity for him to really show that he instills some confidence into the fan base here, that he is gonna be that guy. And there was a run where he had to get by Levi Wallace to get to the outside, and he just couldn't do it. It was a 3rd and 2 play or something like that, and he ends up running backwards and maybe barely getting back to the line of scrimmage. I just didn't really enjoy it too much. I think Murray did really, really good for the touches that he had. And the other wide running backs, no offense to you, you probably won't make the roster, but it's good to see that they had some opportunity out there. And I think for the most part, they performed really well. The only way I can see them making the roster is if Damian Harris doesn't make the roster, right? And there is a possibility for that. I haven't seen this man in forever. He didn't play in any of the games. He's hurt with a knee injury, which isn't news to the Bills. And he's on a cheap contract. So maybe one of these 2 running backs does make the team, and then Damian Harris maybe becomes a trade candidate. I don't know who's going to pick up that, but the contract is really cheap, so if you do have to just eat that, it's not the worst thing in the world. But I think the running back situation is more straightforward than the wide receiver one and quarterback, at least. Let's finish this conversation up by talking about the tight ends. And we'll talk about the bad stuff. And there's not really much, which is really good because I mean, Quentin Morris, I think he had a false start. Dalton Kincaid, he had a false start. There was a drop pass by Quentin Morris, I believe, or it was uncatchable, which really wouldn't be his fault. But I thought that the tight end room was the best performing on the offensive side. And Kincaid really just showed us, again, that he's really performing. The hype is real. And you could see it when he's out there. He's like running, catching, and it just looks easy for him. It looks like water when you like kind of like drop it on like a freshly waxed car. It just like beads off and it's like smooth. And while it looks like the other tight ends, Sternberger, Knox didn't play because he had a like hurt finger or something like that. Which I'm like, yeah, Knox, well, he did break his hand like what, 2 years ago or something like that. Like, let's make sure that our boy is good there. And then Quentin Morris, I thought all of them did fairly well, but man, Kincaid really just is showing that he is the real deal. I have a lot of confidence that that he will contribute to this offense in his rookie year, which I'm a little hesitant about. And this was my reservation when the Bills picked him in the first round, is that tight end is a slow developing position, Andrew. How is this man going to contribute on offense right out the gate? I mean, I think it's going to take some time. Think about Dawson Knox. He wasn't Dawson Knox his first 2 years. It took his third and fourth year to really get there and like really just emphasize, yes, it wasn't a 1 year thing. I am a good tight end. And we bring in Kincaid. I'm like, God, are we going to do that again? Can he reach his ceiling earlier? Well, probably not. His ceiling is probably going to be realized in year 3. But I think the biggest difference between Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid, from a, I guess, philosophy standpoint, is that Dalton Kincaid's floor is significantly higher coming out of college than where Dawson Knox was. Dawson Knox was like raw. Very, very raw. Underutilized. Didn't really do much. Needed to be taught how to do tight end things in the NFL. Whereas Kincaid's coming in and has really, really high upside in receiving pieces, shown that, but needs to work on his blocking. So, that was the offensive side of the football. In all, offensive tackle depth looking kind of sus. Interior offensive line looking pretty good. Wide receivers, there's a interesting battle, in my opinion, between Shorter and Andy Isabella. Running backs look pretty good. Not really sure what we're going to do with Damian Harris. Quarterbacks, it is what it is with Barkley and Kyle Allen. If I'm being predictive and if I had to guess, I think Kyle Allen's probably going to win it. 4 turnovers with the starting crew. It just didn't look great. It really didn't look good for Matt Barkley. The other running backs, I don't really know what we're going to do with them. And the tight ends, strongest position group on the offensive side, in my personal opinion, from today's or yesterday's preseason, I guess, blunders. But the tight ends made us at least feel a little better. Okay, so on the second half of this episode, Justin's going to be talking about the defensive side of football. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Hey, this is Brother Bill. Now back to the show.
Bills Mafia, welcome back in, and thank you again for joining us on this week's episode of the Wandering Buffalo podcast. We had Andrew on the first half of the show breaking down the offensive side of the ball from this preseason debacle. And I'm going to be taking you through some of my thoughts on the defense. Before we get into that, Andrew and I are going to be getting on the same page. We promised that. These Saturday games in particular, kind of with everything we both got going on in life right now, it's making it very difficult. But we will be linking back up. So we have that to look forward to going forward. I just want to talk a little bit about the defensive side of the ball, which I guess in my opinion was the bright side to this game, if there is one, and that sounds kind of crazy to say in a game where they did give up 27 points, but they're just put in terrible situations time after time. How often do you talk about, games where losing the turnover battle, it's going to be a pretty tough to get a win. Well, the Bills turned the ball over 4 times today, which, especially when you get into the preseason games and you're starting to roll through some of your depth and things aren't carrying over, just giant hurdles to overcome. But I think it's a little bit easier to pick out, some good that happened on the defense today. Groot had a sack in there. He had some great run defense. I thought the run defense overall, outside of that 60 whatever yard gain, the 60 yarder earlier in the game, I thought they held up pretty well overall. But definitely not coming away from this game feeling super reassured or confident, in particular with the key position battles that we've been watching, right? And my biggest takeaway from this game on the defensive side of the ball is that middle linebacker spot it's going to be an issue that we're going to have to work around. Kind of watching Dotson last week, it's one preseason game, let's give him some more reps, all that, blah, blah, blah. But we saw him some in action. He's been with the team for a while, and, actions speak louder than words, right? And going into this game, Dotson got the start. Klein came in pretty quickly, and then throughout the game, we see Dotson come back in, and as of right now, the perceived starting middle linebacker for this defense was playing well into the fourth quarter. You simply need to look around the rest of the roster to kind of see what that tells you about, the coaching staff needing to see more from him. You don't really see any starters out there beyond, first, second quarter. I know they got a little bit of extra work today. But the fact that he's playing well into the fourth quarter is very telling. And, maybe it's a situation where Terrell Bernard was making strides and in line to possibly take that starting job. Really unfortunate timing for his injury. I would have at least liked to see what he was doing in preseason. Now it's kind of, those hamstrings take a while. Now kind of if that was the plan, we have to wait till we're in live football reps to see it. And if that looks the same, it's not great. This is something that would be very uncharacteristic for the Bills, especially at a position where possibly looking to upgrade your current starter. But I'd be making some phone calls. There's a couple guys out there. Anthony Barr is one that I would call, see what he's up to, see if he wants a chance to have a couple weeks to compete for a starting job. But the play that we've seen at the middle linebacker position has not been not anything to get me excited or feel any more comfortable than I did going into the season. And who knows, maybe that's a situation where we see some of McDermott's scheme and mastermindiness poke through. Maybe there's a little bit more dime looks than we thought, and Taylor Rapp gets more action than we were expecting. I think that as far as the positional value of it goes, there's spots that would be impacted more than having kind of a weak link be a middle linebacker. But kind of going from Tremaine Edmonds and what he was able to do, covering the middle of the field, affecting the passing game, you really have kind of the complete opposite player in Dotson, where he's pretty effective in the run game, but when it comes to those passing downs, he's just not it. And personally, I'm trading the pass covering potential over run stuffing 10 times out of 10. And I would love to see in the third preseason game that maybe give some work to Dorian Williams in that spot. They've kind of moved back and forth on that already. I don't think it's likely, but just kind of the unknown that exists there, the physical ability. If he can be better in pass coverage, I'll take it and kind of cover up the gaps. There's going to be gaps either way, it looks like at this point, and I would rather a team try to beat us on the ground than, attacking our middle linebacker, across the middle, underneath, all game, every game. So through two preseason games, still not feeling any better about that middle linebacker position. Personally, I'd be making phone calls about it, but pretty late in the process for that. So we will see what happens there going into the third preseason game. The other, the other battle that we've really been paying attention to is that cornerback 2 position, and it to me looks like Dane Jackson is still running away with that job. We saw Kyer Elam today. He looked even more up and down than he looked in the first preseason game to me. And we kind of have the memory of the end of last year, and he was playing well and all that, but he's been grabby in coverage. He got flagged today for pass interference, got beat a few times, and I'm not expecting any of that to not happen. It's just kind of like the way this regime works. Like, if all things are equal, they're going to take the veteran that's been in the system, that's been around, in Dane Jackson. We've seen that over and over again. And as things stand right now, I think Dane Jackson's been playing at a higher level than him. And I don't want to sound too flip-floppy here, because I have been somebody that said, we need to upgrade Dane Jackson. And it's more of like this idea in my head of having like 2 first-round picks and Trey White and insert player X, and kind of just always rotating those players and having high-end two cornerbacks all the time. And when one of them's kind of aging out, you draft the next one. I love that idea on paper. I still do. I still stand by that. As of right now, I think we also have to kind of accept that Dane Jackson is a little bit better than we like to give him credit for. He's where he's supposed to be. He's a pretty sure tackler. Does he get beat up on? Yes. Anybody playing against Trey White's going to get targeted a lot. The NFL, it's easier to make plays on offense than on defense. The rules are kind of set up that way. Is Dane Jackson my ideal starter long-term answer? No, absolutely not. But I think it's also okay. It's not like the sky is falling right now that he's outplaying Kyer Elam right now. He's still a player that's super young, and I heard Joe Marino talking about it. Going into this season, he's like a year and a half younger than I believe it was Dalton Kincaid and Osiris Torrance, and he's in his second year, and they're just coming into the league. I think he's only 22 years old right now. So I don't think that, if he gets beat out by Dane Jackson this year, that, he was, that was a draft pick bust and blah, blah, blah. I think it's not following the trajectory that we would like it to. Certainly not for myself. When you take a player in the first round, you're looking for them to be, an instant starter, impact starter. And I think that's something that I've kind of had to adjust for myself with. I've kind of like with the more success this team has in drafting in the late 20s, this isn't, the top 10 picks that we used to have every year of like, even those guys are a crapshoot, but they're like these blue chip can't miss guys, right? And we saw the Bills bring in all kinds of guys like that, and they were on a shitty team, so it didn't matter. Now we're drafting them into a situation where there are incumbent starters. You have to earn that job. If you're not earning it, we have a guy that was here last year that we'll just keep going with him until you earn it. I still think Kaiir Elam has way more upside than Dane Jackson. But as it stands right now, I'm just trying to kind of be patient there. We've seen a ton of players under this regime really blossom in their third year. You think about a guy like Dawson Knox, Josh Allen, Tremaine Edmonds was kind of a third-year breakout. Ed Oliver kind of had his breakout in his third year. It's something I'm willing to give time, and if Dane Jackson ends up beating out Kaiir Elam, which I'm pretty confident is what's going to happen, it's still a long season, and that it kind of really shores up the depth that we have at that position. Having three guys competing for that CB2 job, Benford in the mix as well. All three of those dudes could be a starting CB2 somewhere else, and we have that amount of depth on the team. So, if injuries happen, I like what our depth looks like. And I also wouldn't rule out, Dane Jackson starts the season. There's, some platooning going on. I fully expect platooning happening, especially with McDermott. They love keeping guys fresh and getting different looks and all that. And, if Dane Jackson is the starter at CB2 week 1, it doesn't mean that by, week 4, week 6, Kaiir Elam's, it hits him. He's grasping it. He puts together, his physical ability with what the team is expecting, his 111th. Doesn't mean that we couldn't see a positional shift at some point in the year where Kaiir Elam takes over the CB2 role. The sky's not falling for me there, but as it stands right now, I think that for me, I feel like that position battle's over at this point. I think it's Dane Jackson's job to lose, and going into the third preseason game here, depending on what McDermott's plan is with the starters, I think we'll know by then. We'll have his actions showing who the starter is going to be without them telling us. Other than that, I do feel like the defense, it wasn't a great day. It wasn't a great day for the Bills as a whole. So not like crazy standouts. I thought the whole team just kind of looked flat, and it's probably the most pitiful preseason performance I've seen under McDermott. I'm pretty confident when I say that. And I almost wonder if it's kind of a byproduct of how deep the roster is. Because when you get into, the third and fourth quarter and you're seeing those guys that are really battling for those depth positions, it was more competitive. And, maybe it's part of a product of not wanting to show too much, the starters knowing what's in front of them, knowing the season that's ahead of them, trying to, do what they got to do and get out healthy. Regardless of how much the game doesn't matter. And I can fully acknowledge that the game means absolutely nothing. I'll take an L in preseason, but how flat they look today, is the only real concern that I have coming out of this one. There wasn't very much juice going on, and it kind of seemed like, they had the big run in the beginning of the game, and then that huge punt return, and it was kind of like all the air went out of the sail. So looking towards the next preseason game, like I said, I'm pretty set on that CB2 competition. I want to see what happens at linebacker. Hopefully Terrell Bernard is able to get back and kind of make his case for being the starter there. There's a lot of time between this game and next game. I wouldn't be surprised if the Bills call up somebody, bring somebody in at least to compete, and try to get some better results there. But wrap up with a quick, little special teams note here. Sam Martin got like as many punts today as he did all of last season, and he looked good. So glad to hear that. Also the penalties. I know a lot of these were on the offensive side of the ball, but there was a handful on the defense too, and that's some shit that's got to get cleaned up. I don't want to go through a regular season game where we have 12 penalties in the first half. That's absurd. And the majority of these penalties, like I said, a lot of them were on the offense, but there wasn't like a ton of these penalties that were like judgment calls by the refs that we can blame them. Just like jumping off sides, pass interference, grabbing jerseys, like the obvious stuff. And I would at least like to be able to, if we're going to take that many penalties, be able to convince myself that the refs were out to get us. That was, 100% blasting ourselves in the foot over and over again today. So that needs to be cleaned up immediately. I don't know. I listened to McDermott's post-game press conference, and he was asked about it, and to me it sounded like, kind of hands up in the air. He's like, we had a method. We were pulling guys out of practice today or this past week, trying to clean that up, and it got worse. So we're gonna go back to the drawing board. And this isn't, an issue that's been uncommon under McDermott. That he's, for as much as he's a discipline first kind of guy, kind of plays no games, very methodical, all that. He's had heavily penalized teams. So I don't know that I have an immense amount of faith in that getting cleaned up, but it will be something I talk about until it does, if it ever does. But that's going to wrap it up for tonight's show. Thank you again for joining us on this week's episode. We'll be back next Monday, breaking down the third and final preseason game against the Bears. Hopefully, a little bit more exciting, good stuff to talk about. If you haven't done so already and you've made it this far in the show, we do ask that you like, share, subscribe, tell a friend, yell Wandering Buffalo out your window. Anything you can do to help us spread the word a little bit really helps keep us going here. And as always, check out the website, wanderingbuff.com. Our producer, Jake, has poured himself into that website. I think it's a pretty great website. We got some articles up, our thoughts on kind of things going on, and we will have some new writers joining the team shortly. So make sure you're checking that out once in a while. A lot of new stuff coming your way. But thank you again for being here. And as always, go Bills.